Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere warm, really warm. You're standing in the highlands of ancient Ethiopia. The sun is strong, almost lazy in its power. Around you, the earth is red and dry, the sky a dazzling, endless blue. And you? Well, you're glistening, because you've just slathered your entire face and arms with a thick coat of fresh butter. That's right, tonight we're exploring a world where people didn't just cook with dairy. They wore it. Welcome to a story where the solution to sunburns, chapped skin, and maybe even bad vibes was butter. And yes, you're probably not surviving a week out here unless you're okay with smelling like a freshly churned milk jug in the midday heat. Spoiler alert, the goats don't mind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to post your location and local time. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake just before dawn in the Ethiopian highlands, in a tiny village tucked between long green ridges and ochre valleys. The air is cool for now, but you know the heat is coming. You hear the bells of cattle in the distance, the soft murmurs of women preparing grain, and the faint, unmistakable sound of butter being worked by hand in a hollowed gourd. It's not for breakfast. No, it's for your skin. In ancient Ethiopia, especially among pastoralist groups like the Afar and Oromo, butter wasn't just food, it was protection. The sun could be brutal, and natural skincare didn't come in tiny plastic bottles from the pharmacy. It came from cows. The butter is rubbed all over your body before you head out into the light. It softens cracked heels, keeps flies at bay, and more importantly, creates a sun-resistant layer that glistens just enough to make you look like a very determined pastry. Historians still argue whether the butter was used more for practical skincare or ritual purposes. Was it beauty? Was it belief? Or just survival? You run your hands over your face, slick with a fresh coating, and step into the light. By mid-morning, you're walking with a group of herders, moving cattle across dry plains toward grazing pastures. The butter starts to melt slightly on your skin. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to remind you that it's real. And as strange as it sounds, you feel protected. A mainstream historical fact here, in regions like Ethiopia, people have been domesticating cattle and using milk products for over 5,000 years. Butter and ghee, clarified butter, were not just foodstuffs but also central in medicine, ritual, and body care. Ancient Ethiopian societies, like the Axumites, were well aware of butter's multi-purpose role long before anyone tried to market it in a jar. You reach a clearing where the grass is still soft from last night's dew. One of the older herders smears a bit of butter across his eyelids. Not because he's trying out the latest TikTok trend, but because it reduces glare from the sun. Think of it like ancient Ray-Bans, but much smellier. A quirky tidbit? In some communities, it was believed that applying butter to the body helped trap health inside the skin, keeping your strength from escaping. Children were massaged in butter to help them grow strong. New mothers, still resting and healing, were covered in it daily, sometimes as part of post-birth cleansing rituals. You lie down beside the cattle for a moment, resting in the hot wind. You can smell the rich scent of dairy, the dry dust on your tongue, and the slight sweetness of wild grasses blowing through. In your half-sleep, you think of the many layers this tradition carries. The butter isn't just a barrier against heat. It's a story, a memory, a connection to ancestors who stood on this same land, under the same sun, gleaming just like you. A few hours later, back in the village, someone prepares a fire for cooking. More butter is used, but this time for frying flatbread. Someone jokes that if you fall into the pan, you'll cook perfectly already. There's gentle laughter, the kind that floats quietly in the heat, soft and full of affection. You settle on a mat in the shade and close your eyes, your skin still shiny, still warm. The sun is starting to slip down, casting gold across the valley. And just before you drift off, you hear someone say it's time to churn again. The next batch of protective butter is nearly ready, because out here, the sun never sleeps and neither does the skincare. You open your eyes to the scent of something earthy and bubbling. The butter-slicked memories of Ethiopia drift off like morning mist as a new setting slowly takes its place. You're kneeling beside a clay vat under a reed-roofed pavilion somewhere in ancient Sumer around 3000 BCE. The air is heavy with the smell of fermenting grain, clay, and wet barley mash. And yes, you're about to help make beer. But here's the twist, you're not just visiting. You're part of the brewery crew. And if you're imagining ancient Mesopotamian monks with foamy tankards, well, think again. Because here in Sumer, brewing is women's work. And you've just been handed a ladle the size of your forearm by a priestess wearing a necklace made of cowrie shells and clay beads. Tonight, you're stepping into the sandals of the original brewmasters, the women who made the beer that fed a civilization. You trudge across the brewery floor, really more a courtyard than a building, surrounded by baskets of sprouting grain and large ceramic vats buried halfway into the earth. The barley's already soaked and beginning to ferment, and your job, as assigned by the temple brewmistress, is to stir slowly and keep the mixture from settling too hard. It's not glamorous. It's not sterile. But it is sacred. You glance up at a wall painting, faded but still clear enough to make out Ninkasi, the goddess of beer. She's depicted holding what looks like a golden ladle in one hand and a cup in the other, flanked by symbols of abundance. Sheaves of barley, rising sun, and flowing rivers. She isn't just a deity. She's your shift manager. A mainstream fact, the hymn to Ninkasi, one of the oldest surviving beer recipes in history, dates back to ancient Sumer and was sung as part of daily brewing routines. It served as both ritual and instruction. Imagine singing a sacred jingle while you stir. And that fringe tidbit you didn't expect? Ancient beer was more porridge than Pilsner. Served in large communal jars, it was sipped through long reed straws to bypass the layer of mash that floated on top. So if you're thinking of cracking open a cold one, think again. You'll need a straw, a friend, and a high tolerance for chunky textures. You sit for a moment, legs tired from squatting, and watch as the mash bubbles lazily in the heat. Behind you, another woman pours some of the fresh brew into small clay cups. It's warm, faintly sweet, and surprisingly filling. This isn't just a drink, it's lunch. In a land where clean water was dicey at best, beer was safer, calorie-dense, and even fed to children in diluted form. Historians still argue whether these early beers had any alcohol content high enough to create intoxication, or if they were mostly functional, a drinkable loaf of bread, as some like to say. Some even suggest beer functioned as currency. Laborers, especially on temple projects, were often paid in grain or daily rations of brew. You take another sip, this time slower. The flavors are complex, nutty, grassy, with a hint of date and spice. Someone nearby hums a soft chant, maybe a version of the Ninkasi hymn, its rhythms worn down by generations of repetition. It's mesmerizing, and just when you think you've seen it all, an older brewer walks past and drops a fistful of something unexpected, crushed juniper and cumin, into a separate fermentation jar. You blink. Special batch, she says with a wink. For the priestess's festival. You lean back against a stack of empty grain baskets and let the hum of the brewery lull you. The clink of clay against clay, the slosh of stirred liquid, and the occasional low chant rise and fall like a lullaby. The women around you are focused but gentle, moving with the ease of those who've repeated this routine since childhood. Here, in this world, beer isn't indulgence. It's nourishment, spirituality, and craft. You're not just a guest, you're part of something ancient, slow, and bubbling with meaning. You glance once more at Ninkasi on the wall. She's still smiling. You blink again and the clay vats and barley mash dissolve into mist. The soft gurgle of fermenting grain fades, replaced by something sharper. The scent of crushed leaves, cool stone, and a whisper of wood smoke drifting on damp jungle air. You're standing at the edge of a thatched healing hut deep in the heart of the ancient Maya world, somewhere near what is now Guatemala, around 900 CE. A humid breeze stirs the canopy, birds screech lazily overhead, and a healer, an Ajman, nods for you to enter. Don't worry, you're not sick. Yet. But you are about to witness one of the strangest, most intricate medical systems ever recorded. Let's just say the Maya didn't believe in half measures. And yes, one of tonight's co-stars is a jar of live maggots. Try to stay still. Inside, the hut is dim but ordered. Stone shelves hold bundles of dried herbs tied with dyed twine. Calabash gourds sit in clusters, each one labeled with carved glyphs you can't read. And in the center of it all, an older man in a tunic embroidered with blue quetzal feathers dips his hands into a basin of thick green paste. A mainstream historical fact for you to pocket: the ancient Maya practiced surprisingly advanced medicine for their time. They cleaned wounds, sutured them with human hair, and used obsidian blades so fine that modern surgeons now study them for ultra-precise cuts. Now here comes your quirky tidbit: the Maya used live maggots to clean festering wounds. Not metaphorically. Literally. Fly larvae were placed onto infected tissue to eat away dead flesh, nature's cleanup crew with no medical degree. And here's where your stomach may do a somersault. You're handed a clay dish and it's wriggling. These are clean, the Ajman assures you, casually, as if you've been a lifelong fan of insect therapy. The larvae are fat, cream-colored, and moving with far more enthusiasm than you'd prefer at this hour. You glance at the patient, a young warrior with a gash across his thigh. He doesn't even flinch. The maggots go to work and the healer leans close to you, explaining the logic in low tones. Remove the rot, let the living heal. Clean kill, clean spirit. Historians still argue whether the Maya learned this technique independently or if it emerged through centuries of observation and spiritual integration. After all, their medicine wasn't just physical. It was deeply spiritual, tied to astronomy, dreams, and the whispers of ancestor spirits encoded in breath and bone. As the treatment continues, you're shown the rest of the healer's toolkit. Crushed bark mixed with lime to soothe ulcers. Tobacco smoke blown into ears to ease vertigo. And a strange black stone, polished smooth, used in rituals to pull out illness through the skin. Part psychosomatic, part performance art, and part something else entirely. In the background, a novice prepares a steam bath to Mazgul. You peek inside. The air is thick with pine resin and burning herbs. It's part purification, part spa day, part cosmic reset. You're invited in, but not before being rubbed down with a paste made from crushed ants, chili peppers, and lime. Delightful. The steam hits your face like a wall. You sit, eyes closed, as chants rise in rhythm with the pulsing drum outside. And here, somewhere between fever dream and clarity, the lines blur. The healer's hand on your shoulder. The jungle vibrating with unseen patterns. The absolute certainty that something older than science is at play here. Later, when you step back out into the cool night, there's a strange calm in your chest. The maggots are done. The patient is bandaged with woven bark, painted with herbal oils, and sleeping deeply. You want to ask if this all really works, but you're met with a look that says, of course. And also, does it matter? Because here in this world, healing is more than biology. It's balance. Between life and decay. Between body and cosmos. Between you and a jar of bugs. The jungle heat fades like breath on glass. You blink and suddenly the air dries out, your skin instantly prickles from the shift. Gone are the steamy herbs and chittering birds. In their place, stillness. Silence. Sand. You stand now at the edge of a Persian village, sometime around the 5th century BCE. The sun hangs above like a molten coin. The desert sprawls endlessly. And yet you're freezing. Well, not exactly, but close. Because before you is something that shouldn't exist here, a domed structure with long vertical ribs like the hull of an upside-down ship. A yakshal. An ice house. In the desert, tonight you're going to learn how ancient Persians, not exactly known for gentle winters, kept ice frozen all year long. No electricity, no magic, just mud, geometry, and genius. You walk toward the yakshal, its walls thick with a special clay mixture called sarouj, water, ash, egg whites, goat hair, lime, and sand. Basically, the world's first eco-insulation. You press your hand against the outer wall. It's cool. Not just cooler than the desert cold. Inside, the air shifts again. You duck through a narrow doorway and find yourself in a conical chamber with a floor sunk deep into the earth. The walls curve up toward an opening at the top that lets warm air escape like a chimney while cold air stays trapped below. Here's your mainstream historical fact. These yakshals were used to store ice harvested in the winter, often collected from specially designed channels that froze water at night. They were engineering marvels that worked through convection and thermal mass, centuries before modern refrigeration. Now for your quirky tidbit, in some towns, ice wasn't just a summer luxury. It was used to cool desserts, treat fevers, and impress foreign dignitaries. One story claims that Persian nobility offered chilled rosewater sorbet to guests as early as 400 BCE. Imagine sweating through the desert and being handed snow. You descend a few steps into the lower chamber. The temperature drops noticeably. Blocks of ice are stacked against one wall, wrapped in layers of straw and woven reed. A young boy pads softly across the stone floor, dragging a basket of shaved ice behind him. He offers you a taste, just a few crystals drizzled with grape syrup and dusted with saffron. You melt a little. Not from heat, from happiness. Historians still argue whether these structures were used mainly for ice or whether they doubled as underground pantries and emergency storage. Some evidence suggests dried meats, yogurt, and rosewater tinctures were kept here too. Anything sensitive to the brutal heat of a Persian summer. You sit near the back wall where the shadows collect. Outside, the day continues to burn. But here in the belly of the dome, time slows. You can hear the water droplets condensing, falling softly onto stone. The yakshal breathes like a sleeping animal. Steady. Calm. A builder joins you. A wiry man with hands like river stone. He explains how the water channels outside are tilted just enough to encourage flow during the day but freeze solid at night. He talks of wind catchers, tall towers that direct airflow through homes and structures like natural air conditioning. He grins, proud. You nod, impressed. Later, you're led to the roof. From here, the village spreads out like a sand-colored mosaic. In the distance, mountains bleed into the sky. The dome beneath your feet radiates a strange serenity, cool, ancient, efficient. And the best part? It's utterly silent. No buzz of compressors. No hum of machines. Just wind, clay, and ingenuity. You close your eyes. Somewhere nearby, someone's pouring syrup over a fresh bowl of shaved ice. You wonder if they'll share. You blink once more and the dry winds of the Persian plateau dissolve, replaced by the sharp scent of seawater and pine. It's colder now, bracingly so. Your boots crunch through frost-hardened dirt and your breath fogs the air like ghost steam. Welcome to the 10th century North Sea coast, Viking territory. Snow clings to thatched rooftops. Longhouses huddle against the wind like ships bracing for storm. And in the center of the settlement, a pyre has been built, but it's not burning. Tonight, you meet the Viking who refused to burn, literally. His name was Harold, and while his story sits somewhere between legend and fact, it's the kind of tale that makes you wonder, were the Norse more stubborn than they were savage? You stand at the edge of the funeral mound. Villagers in woolen cloaks circle the stacked logs, whispering. The pyre's been doused in oil. The prayers have been said. But each time someone strikes a spark, the flame fizzles out. Smoke curls, but no fire catches. As if the very air itself won't allow it. You catch sight of the body. Broad-shouldered, stern-faced, dressed in a shirt of mail. He's clutching a sword so old it looks like it might disintegrate if you exhaled too hard. His boots are polished. His braids are neat. He looks ready. According to the sagas, and yes, this is your mainstream historical fact, Vikings believed deeply in a proper send-off. The dead had to be honored with ship burials, goods, and fire so they could join Odin in Valhalla or sail to otherworldly shores. Cremation wasn't just a ritual. It was the passport to the afterlife. Now for your fringe detail. Sometimes a body wouldn't burn. This was seen as an omen. Either the person had unfinished business or worse, they weren't entirely dead in the eyes of the gods. There's even a Norse term for it, draugr, undead, restless, a being stuck between worlds. Harold was no ordinary warrior. He'd never lost a duel, never bent the knee to any king. And legend says he swore, loudly and frequently, that even death wouldn't claim him without a fight. You wander through the village, trying not to let that thought settle too deep in your bones. Every few minutes, someone tries again. A torch is held to the wood. Another prayer is whispered, but the fire won't bite. Inside one longhouse, an elder woman, part priestess, part historian, tells you her version. She claims Harold once broke a sacred oath by refusing to avenge a wrong done to his brother. Some say the gods still wait for retribution. Others believe the truth is simpler. It's just too damp. Historians still argue whether Viking fire failures like these were rare accidents or transformed into myth after the fact. The sagas are full of grand embellishments, but there are enough stories of uncooked corpses to raise a skeptical eyebrow. You return to the pyre at dusk. The wind dies down. A final torch is lit and touched to the wood, and this time it does catch. The fire climbs, cracks, roars. The villagers begin to chant. You expect closure. But instead, a storm rolls in. Fast. Too fast. Rain pelts the flames, steam rising in angry spirals. In a blink, the fire dies again, leaving a blackened, soggy heap and a body that seems entirely unbothered. You shiver. Maybe it was just bad luck. Or maybe Harold got his wish. Later, you sit in the longhouse, sipping something warm from a wooden cup. You glance at the fire pit, thankfully still burning, and ask someone what they'll do now. They shrug. We'll try again tomorrow. He'll burn when he's ready. You lie back on a straw mat, letting the heat of the hearth lull your muscles into softness. As you drift, you wonder what kind of Viking declares war on death and wins. Just a little longer, Harold. You wake to the rustle of silk and the faint aroma of sandalwood. Your eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through latticed windows, and suddenly you're thousands of miles and centuries away from the Viking coast. You now walk the corridors of Tang Dynasty China, around the 8th century CE. Somewhere inside the grand postal complex of Chang'an, the empire's capital. The floors are polished smooth from the shoes of messengers, and the walls echo faintly with footsteps and rustling scrolls. Tonight, you're following the journey of a single letter, an imperial dispatch carried across mountains, deserts, and winding river valleys. But this isn't just any message. It's soaked in perfume. Not for romance, mind you. This was policy. You see, during the Tang Dynasty, China had one of the most advanced courier networks the world had ever seen. This is your mainstream historical fact. The imperial post, known as the Yizhan system, linked the vast empire with relay stations every 30 to 40 kilometers. Couriers on horseback rode day and night, switching horses at each stop like marathon runners passing the baton. But here's your fringe tidbit. Letters from the emperor were sometimes scented. Not just to prevent tampering, though the fragrance made it easier to detect if the seal had been broken, but to emphasize authority. A scroll arriving with the emperor's signature scent? That was a power move. One recipe involved soaking the paper in a mix of agarwood, camphor, and musk, like sealing national policy with a whiff of immortality. You trail a courier now, a lean, nimble man in plain robes, his belt pouch heavy with scrolls. His orders are to ride from Chang'an to the western frontier. That's nearly 2,000 kilometers of winding terrain, crossing the Gansu corridor and skimming the edge of the Taklamakan Desert. You hop on a second horse, trying not to bounce right off. The pace is relentless. At each post, the courier leaps off, hands over his travel token, and is offered food, water, and a fresh mount. The posts are bustling. Cooks stir vats of rice porridge, stable hands tend to foamy, exhausted horses, and scribes check parchment inventories. You pause at a tiny outpost perched between hills. Here, a postmaster sits beside a lacquered box, carefully sniffing each letter before sealing it with wax. One scroll is burned slightly at the edge, a warning from a rival court. He sniffs it twice, frowns, and stamps it with a dragon emblem. Historians still argue whether these scenting practices were widespread or reserved for elite envoys only. Some believe they doubled as an early form of document security. Others argue it was merely ceremonial, like wearing your best robes to deliver bad news. By the third day, you and the courier reach a vast river crossing. A bamboo raft sways on the current, ferrying you both across to a fortified garrison. There, the final scroll is unwrapped and presented to the local governor, who bows before even reading it. One sniff and he knows. The emperor has spoken. You sit by a fire that night with the courier. He's exhausted but proud. He tells you he's ridden this route 48 times. Only lost one letter, eaten by a tiger. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Wasn't scented. He laughs. You're not sure he's joking. In the morning, you help him pack for his return trip. No reward. No parade. Just another ride. Another scroll. Another 1,000 miles. You watch as he disappears down the dusty road, the sun rising like a red coin over the rooftops. Somewhere in his pouch is another letter, and maybe, just maybe, it smells like heaven. The scent of sandalwood fades. Now you wake to the earthy, smoky aroma of ash, not the kind that drifts from a cozy hearth. This ash is older, grittier. Sacred. You sit upright on a woven mat in a dimly lit stone chamber, thick with silence. A torch flickers on the far wall, casting shadows on golden carvings. You're inside a hidden room deep in the royal palace of Sri Lanka's Anuradhapura kingdom centuries ago. The floor is covered in cool charcoal. The air hums with incense. And in the middle of it all, a queen, sleeping in ashes. Tonight, you meet Queen Anula, the first female monarch of Sri Lanka, who ruled over 2,000 years ago and, according to legend, made ashes her nightly bed. You rise, barefoot on cold stone. Her chamber feels like a temple, but without the pomp. No plush pillows, no gilded screens. Just silence and scorched powder underfoot. The queen is lying in a shallow box of ash, her limbs tucked like a resting cat, skin powdered with soot like ceremonial paint. Now for your mainstream historical fact, Queen Anula ruled from 47 to 42 BCE and was officially the first woman in Asia to become a monarch in her own right, not through marriage or regency, but as sovereign. Her reign, though brief, was marked by scandal, spiritual experimentation, and an unusually high turnover rate of husbands. Which brings us to the fringe detail. Some chronicles claim she practiced a form of nightly purification by sleeping in ashes, a ritual borrowed from fire-worshipping ascetics. This wasn't just symbolic. It was said to purify the soul, preserve beauty, and, according to palace gossip, confer control over death. You kneel quietly as the queen stirs, rising slowly. Her hair is bound in tight coils. Her eyes are calm, distant, and sharp. She doesn't acknowledge you directly, but you're clearly allowed to watch. She walks barefoot to a copper basin and pours water over her soot-covered hands. Then she picks up a small bundle wrapped in banana leaves. It's not food. It's dried herbs, basil, neem, and something bitter you can't identify. She chews it slowly, staring into nothing. Her priest approaches. He carries a scroll and speaks in hushed tones. You hear a name, one of her consorts. Apparently, he's gone missing. She doesn't blink. Historians still argue whether Queen Annula truly poisoned every husband she ever had, as many as 5 by some counts, or whether that part of the story was added later by monks annoyed that a woman had seized power. What we do know is that her rule ended violently. She was eventually overthrown and executed, burned alive in the very ashes she once slept in. Which brings a rather unsettling question. Was this ritualistic ash sleeping an act of spiritual defiance or a grim rehearsal? You step out of the queen's chamber as sunrise paints the sky in soft coral hues. In the palace courtyard, servants sweep ash from the steps, unaware or perhaps entirely aware of what it means. One of them hums a lullaby. It's the same tune you heard in the queen's chamber, drifting faintly under her breath as she slept. You join a group of monks for morning tea. One of them chuckles when you ask about Annula. She ruled like a lion but slept like a ghost, he says. Even the gods didn't know what to do with her. Later that evening, you find yourself drawn back to the chamber. The ash box is empty. Only a faint outline remains where her body once rested. You lie down just for a moment, feeling the cool dust cling to your skin like a shroud. It's oddly comforting. And as your eyes close, the soft crackle of an invisible fire returns, low, ancient, and content to burn in silence. You wake with a gentle rocking beneath you, not from a bed. You're floating. You're stretched out on a narrow wooden canoe, gliding silently across a lake so still it mirrors the sky. Around you, patches of vivid green drift on the water, laced with blossoming marigolds, chili peppers, and maize stalks swaying in the breeze. Birds chitter in the reeds, and distant laughter rolls across the water. You've arrived in Tenochtitlan, capital of the mighty Aztec Empire, in the year 1482. But not on land. You're drifting through Chinampas, the floating gardens of Lake Texcoco. From a distance, it looks like magic. A field growing on water so dense and stable you could walk across it barefoot without a wobble. But as you lean over the edge of your canoe and trail your fingers in the water, you realize this is no illusion. It's engineering. Patient, precise, beautiful engineering. Let's anchor down with your mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs developed Chinampas, rectangular plots of fertile farmland built on shallow lake beds, centuries before the Spanish conquest. The system allowed them to feed a population of over 200,000 in Tenochtitlan alone, one of the largest cities in the world at that time. But here's your fringe tidbit. These floating gardens weren't just for crops. Some had tiny shrines, family homes, even small animal pens. It wasn't uncommon to see a Chinampa holding a single turkey pacing along next to tomato vines and a smiling grandmother tending to basil in the corner. You glide closer now, guided by a boy no older than 12. His arms are strong from daily rowing, and he grins as he hands you a paddle made from polished wood. Watch out for the frogs, he says. They bite if you sing badly. You make a mental note to avoid humming. You spend the morning on a tiny Chinampa belonging to a local family. The grandmother speaks to her chili plants as she picks them, calls them angry children. Her son shows you how the Chinampa is built, a frame of wooden stakes driven into the lakebed, filled with mud, compost, and rotted vegetation. Willow trees planted at the corners hold it in place like anchors. You help them scoop nutrient-rich silt from the canal and spread it onto the plot. It smells like fish and rain. As you sit under a canvas shade, eating a tamale wrapped in corn husk, a farmer tells you a theory whispered among the elders that Chinampas could one day float across the lake like rafts, carrying homes and lives with them. A city adrift. Historians still argue whether these mobile Chinampas were ever real or merely legend. Some say the stories came later, confused with reed boats. Others swear they existed until they floated too far and were never seen again. In the afternoon, you visit the market, yes, on water. Narrow canals, separate rows of trading boats where sellers call out in Nahuatl, offering cacao, obsidian blades, parrot feathers, and dried insects. You pass a woman with red-painted lips selling honey made by stingless bees. She hands you a taste. It's floral, almost spicy. You buy a small gourd of it and sip like it's tea. A storm rolls in by evening. The sky turns slate gray and the lake ripples with cold wind. You help your host family anchor their Chinampa with extra rope, laughing as the grandmother scolds the clouds in Nahuatl like they're misbehaving children. She has a shrine tucked into the corner of her garden, dedicated to Tlaloc, god of rain, and she whispers something to it before retreating into the tiny shelter. You fall asleep there on the garden itself, curled between squash leaves and corn stalks, the scent of wet soil rising around you. Raindrops patter on the canvas roof above, and the entire garden gently sways under you, like being rocked by the earth itself. And you realize even now you're still floating. You wake to the echo of sandals on gravel. Click. Scuff. Pause. You open your eyes and find yourself kneeling beneath the full moon in the garden of a quiet shrine somewhere deep in feudal Japan. Bamboo rustles nearby. A stone lantern casts a flickering orange halo. Someone is approaching, slowly, with the weight of centuries in every step. It's a samurai, but not in the thick of battle. He's not shouting or charging or brandishing anything sharp. He's walking with bare feet, in ceremonial robes, and his katana, a sleek arc of polished steel, rests across both his hands like an offering, and he's carrying it toward a grave. Tonight, you meet Masakato's retainer, a loyal samurai who, according to whispers passed down through generations, once gave up his sword to a ghost. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the Heian period of Japan, roughly 794 to 1185, samurai culture was still evolving. Warriors were not yet the stoic, armored icons you might imagine. Many were retainers tied to powerful families, balancing combat with ritual and politics. And one of the most feared rebels of this era was Taira no Masakato, a warrior who defied the emperor and declared himself new emperor of Eastern Japan in the 10th century. Now, for your quirky detail. According to a centuries-old tale, after Masakato's death, his head taken to Kyoto and displayed, his spirit remained so restless that it sparked hauntings across the capital. Eventually, a samurai loyal to Masakato reportedly returned to the rebel's grave and surrendered his blade. Not to a man, to a ghost. You crouch quietly beneath the pine trees, watching the ritual unfold. The samurai bows once, then kneels before a moss-covered stone mound. He whispers a prayer. The katana lies before him, gleaming in the moonlight like a drop of mercury. The air chills. He speaks aloud. I failed to protect you, but I return my blade so that your spirit may not wander alone. And then he waits. There's a sound light like silk brushing silk. No footsteps, no wind, just a shift in the air, as if something ancient has stirred. He does not look up. He's not allowed to. Historians still argue whether this sword offering was a real tradition, a folk embellishment, or a tale invented to explain the terrifying string of misfortunes that plagued Kyoto after Masakato's death. Earthquakes, lightning strikes, mysterious illnesses. Many were blamed on his vengeful ghost. Even today, Masakato's grave in Tokyo is one of the most quietly respected sites in the city. Office workers avoid looking at it directly. It's rebuilt after every storm. And every year, someone leaves a small blade wrapped in white cloth at the base of the shrine. You leave the samurai to his vigil and step into the deeper forest. Crickets trill. A paper lantern bobs ahead. You follow the path to a thatched tea house where an elderly monk is waiting with 2 cups of bitter matcha and a plate of pickled plums. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, his voice is sandpaper and soot. Some swords, he says, sipping slowly, are not meant to cut men. They're meant to cut ties. You nod as if you understand. You probably don't. Before you sleep, the monk hands you a scroll. You unroll it by the hearthlight. It's a poem, not by a famous author, but scrawled in brushstrokes by the samurai himself. It reads, "Steel forged for kings, now humbled by twilight winds, rest, my wandering lord. You sleep on a futon that smells faintly of cedar and old tea. Outside, the forest exhales. Somewhere in the distance, a ghost stands guard, silent, sharp, and finally at peace. The floor is cool beneath your feet. Not carpet, not tile, not even sand. It's polished alabaster, smooth, pale stone carved into intricate geometric patterns that seem to shimmer faintly in the early morning light. You're barefoot. Everyone is, and no one dares question it. You're in the palace of Pharaoh Akhenaten, ruler of Egypt, husband to Nefertiti, and the man who changed everything, including, quite possibly, the footwear policy. Hey, don't laugh. He may have banned shoes. Your first clue? You haven't seen a single sandal since you got here. Guards pad softly across the stone like cats. Servants rush past with pitchers of wine and platters of dates, all barefoot. Even visiting nobles stand awkwardly at the palace gates, slipping off their golden sandals and tucking them under one arm before stepping inside. And that's your mainstream historical fact. Pharaoh Akhenaten reigned around 1353 to 1336 BCE, revolutionized ancient Egyptian religion, art, and architecture. He declared the sun god Aten as the one true deity, moved the capital to a brand new city called Akhetaten, modern Amarna, and threw out centuries of polytheistic tradition. His rule was short, strange, and deeply controversial. Many of his reforms were reversed after his death. But here's your fringe tidbit. There are accounts from Amarna period texts and iconography showing Akhenaten and his family often depicted barefoot even in public or formal scenes. Some scholars suggest this wasn't just artistic flair, but a spiritual policy. A deliberate ban on shoes within sacred palace grounds, perhaps to honor Aten by maintaining direct contact with the earth his rays blessed. You're ushered through an open-air courtyard. The ceiling is gone by design. Akhenaten believed in worshipping beneath the open sky, bathing daily in sunlight like a plant in a divine greenhouse. The sun hits your shoulders, warm and welcome. A priest guides you through columns etched with lotus blossoms and cartouches. He speaks gently, explaining the pharaoh's beliefs. The sun, he says, sees all. To hide your feet from it is to disrespect its gift. You look down at your feet. They are dusty, sure, a bit sunburnt, but somehow regal. A servant washes them with a basin of cool water before you enter the next chamber. She smiles as if this is the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it is. You're escorted into the throne room. Akhenaten lounges sideways on a cushioned dais draped in linen so thin it might as well be vapor. His elongated face and narrow eyes give him an almost alien presence. He beckons you forward, not with authority, but with something stranger, serenity. You bow. Your feet squeak slightly against the floor. He chuckles. Akhenaten speaks with a voice like honey steeped in sunlight. Even the earth deserves to feel your presence, he says. Shoes lie. Feet confess. You're not sure what that means. But you nod anyway. Historians still argue whether the barefoot representations of Akhenaten were symbolic, practical, or part of a broader religious decree. Some claim it was simply artistic, meant to show humility before Aten. Others believe it reflects a real, lived rule within palace grounds, emphasizing a rejection of material vanity and a connection to sacred earth. You wander through the palace gardens where fig trees grow beside pools filled with lotus blossoms. Children play, laughing barefoot in the mud as noble women recline in shaded pavilions. A musician plucks a harp, her toes flexing gently against the grass. By evening, you're reclining beneath an awning, sipping pomegranate wine. Your feet are sore, slightly sunburned, and absolutely filthy. But oddly, you feel more grounded than ever. A scribe offers to paint your soles with henna, an offering to Aten. You agree. The designs swirl like sunbeams and carry the scent of saffron and smoke. As you drift off to sleep on a silk mat beside a fountain, the last thing you hear is a whisper from a priest walking past. Shoes are for those who forget the path. And just like that, your soles are sacred. You wake up with hay in your hair and a bell tolling somewhere far away. Not the nice kind of bell. Not a gentle chime from a clock tower in Vienna or a temple gong in Kyoto. No, this bell clangs like it's annoyed at you personally. Sharp. Urgent. Echoing across the damp stone walls of a medieval convent. You sit up slowly, a little disoriented, and realize you're lying in a hay-strewn alcove that smells faintly of cheese, wax, and incense. Welcome to the 14th century Low Countries. Tonight, you're keeping pace with a woman who vanishes, reappears, and scandalizes her entire cloister. Not by sinning necessarily, but by rewriting the rules of what devotion even means. Your mainstream historical fact: in the late medieval period, convents were not only religious institutions but often the only path for women, especially those of noble birth who didn't want marriage. Inside those walls, some found purpose, some found peace, and others found ways to escape, spiritually or otherwise. And your fringe tidbit. Among them was a real woman named Marjorie Kemp, an English mystic who tried to become a nun several times, failed, and then spent her life wandering barefoot, weeping loudly, and claiming visions of Christ. But tonight, we're focusing on a lesser-known case. A nameless nun who allegedly faked her own death, had herself buried, and then kept living. Sort of. You sneak behind a carved wooden screen and peer into the candlelit chapel. A group of sisters are kneeling, heads bowed. At the center lies a crude wooden coffin. Inside it, a woman wrapped in coarse linen, still as a statue, except she's not dead. She's breathing slowly, shallowly. Her eyelids flutter once as the abbess sprinkles holy water over her face. You squint. This isn't a miracle in progress. This is a loophole. As the story goes, this nun, perhaps seeking escape from an arranged spiritual marriage, or perhaps driven by visions of sainthood, had her own death staged. With the help of a sympathetic novice and a reluctant cook, she went through a burial rite, was declared deceased, and was placed in the convent crypt for quiet reflection. But instead of dying, she lived in the walls. Literally, there were medieval practices called anchoritic reclusion, where particularly devout individuals walled themselves into small cells beside churches, living out their days in solitude, prayer, and sometimes mild insanity. These anchorites could see the altar through a tiny window, and townspeople brought them food through a slot in the bricks. Our mystery nun took it a step further. She bypassed the formal rituals and faked the death part. Once the funeral was done, she had herself sealed into an abandoned side chamber of the crypt, complete with a small grate looking into the chapel. She ate in secret, spoke only to God, and scribbled down half-lucid visions on scraps of parchment that still survive in a Bavarian archive. One particularly haunting note reads, "I am neither ghost nor saint, only silence with a pulse." You pass through a low arch and into her cell. It's barely larger than a closet. Scratch marks along the wall suggest she measured time, days, months, maybe years. A faded icon of Mary hangs near a slit window. There's a faint smell of roses and mildew. Historians still argue whether this nun's reclusion was an act of piety, madness, or protest. Was she escaping a life she didn't choose, seeking sainthood through endurance? Or was it just an elaborate cry for attention in a world where women's voices echoed only within stone walls? The convent eventually declared her resurrected, not metaphorically, but literally. After several years, when a new bishop found out about the stunt, he ordered the cell broken open. She emerged pale, trembling, and apparently radiant. Some claimed she glowed in the dark. Others claimed she fainted immediately and never woke up. You leave the cell and walk quietly through the cloister gardens where moonlight pools in the stone fountains and a single cat slinks between the rosemary bushes. A novice nods at you and offers a wink. You wonder how many dead women are still breathing behind convent walls. As you lie in the dormitory beside softly snoring sisters, you whisper the nun's borrowed motto to the darkness. "I am silence with a pulse." You're walking now, bare feet pressing into parched earth, the scent of lust dust heavy in your nostrils. There's no grass here, only flat plains dotted with dry bushes and the distant hum of wind weaving through tomb mounds. A low hill stretches ahead, man-made but ancient. Below it, something that once terrified grave robbers and archaeologists alike. A trap-laden tomb so grand it nearly bankrupted an empire. Tonight, you're entering the underworld of China's first emperor, the famously paranoid Qin Shi Huang. Hey guys, tonight we are walking into the silent halls beneath Xi'an, where thousands of clay soldiers guard a man who conquered an empire and still wasn't satisfied. You'll stand beside statues who haven't blinked in 2,000 years, and ponder what kind of person thinks immortality might come from pottery. You probably won't survive this, by the way, not because the tomb is cursed, probably, but because the sheer scale of it might smother your brain with awe. Just the mercury alone would knock you out cold. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these sleepy little time machines travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You descend through rock and loam into a warren of chambers unlike any on Earth. Your lantern flickers against carved beams and strange symbols. The air is thick, as if the dust remembers something. The story begins long before the tomb, when a boy named Ing Zheng became king of the Qin state at just 13. You know how most kids that age are still figuring out long division? Ing was already plotting world domination. By 221 BCE, he'd succeeded. He conquered 6 rival kingdoms and declared himself Qin Shi Huang, meaning first emperor of Qin. Not king, not ruler. Emperor. Capital E. The first in Chinese history. He abolished feudalism, standardized weights, writing, and cart axles, yes, axles, and started building the Great Wall. Mainstream historical fact? He unified China. That's not hyperbole. He took squabbling warlords and forged a single, centralized state that set the tone for over 2 millennia. Fringe tidbit? He was absolutely obsessed with cheating death. You wander deeper into the earth and suddenly you're standing face to face with one of his most infamous ideas. The Terracotta Army. Thousands of life-size soldiers arranged in formation, each one with a unique face, hairstyle, and even expression. Archers, generals, charioteers. Their weapons were real. Their presence? Unearthly. You walk past a bearded soldier who looks vaguely disappointed in you. Another looks like he's mid-sneeze. A third stares blankly ahead like he's waiting for a Starbucks order that's taking too long. All of them were buried to protect the emperor in the afterlife. Not metaphorically. Qin Shi Huang believed his soul would continue on and that he would need a military to keep conquering wherever he ended up. You step lightly over trenches still being excavated. Shards of glazed armor crunch underfoot. Somewhere behind you, a horse statue waits, frozen mid-stride. And then there's the tomb itself. We haven't opened it. That's not dramatic suspense, we literally have not opened it. Archaeologists know where it is. We know how big it is. We've used radar and probes and all sorts of tech, and here's what we found. A massive central chamber buried beneath a mound, surrounded by underground rivers said to be filled with mercury. The ceiling is studded with pearls to mimic the night sky. Crossbows were allegedly rigged to fire on intruders. The soil has unusually high mercury levels. Ancient texts say the emperor built the tomb in secret using 700,000 laborers. Many were never seen again. Historians still argue whether those mercury rivers are real or poetic metaphor, whether the traps were functional or folklore. But the result is the same, no one's cracked the inner tomb. No one's dared. As you creep into one of the peripheral chambers, you find clay acrobats, yes, performers caught mid-flip. A strongman with bulging clay biceps. A court musician with a stone zither. There's even a clay bird perched on a fake wooden branch. This wasn't just a military installation. It was a world, a miniature kingdom built to serve one man's ego or loneliness. Imagine being so afraid of death, so desperate for continuity, that you bury your entire civilization around you like packing peanuts. You reach the innermost corridor we've dared to touch. A sealed bronze gate stands silent. Behind it? We don't know. A throne? A mummified emperor? A lab of ancient alchemy? Or nothing? The irony is, Qin Shi Huang's obsession with immortality may have hastened his death. He drank mercury-laced elixirs believing they'd make him eternal. They made him very dead. You lie down near the feet of a clay spearman and listen to the stillness. Not a breath, not a hum, just dust and eternity. You wonder, if the tomb is opened in your lifetime, will the emperor be pleased? Or will he look you straight in the eye across 2 millennia and say, "Took you long enough"? You wake up shivering, wrapped in pelts that smell faintly of wood smoke and fish. A brittle northern wind bites at your cheeks, and you sit up to find yourself inside a longhouse, narrow, dim, warm with hearth smoke and buzzing with the low murmur of a Norse household. You're in Viking-age Scandinavia now, and while the men are off raiding distant coasts or accidentally discovering North America, you're here to meet the women who ran entire villages and, occasionally, walked away from their husbands like it was a Tuesday chore. Yes, tonight you're stepping into the wool-clad, iron-willed world of Viking women. And if you thought they were just quietly weaving in the background while longboats set sail, prepare for a deeply relaxing history lesson in fierce independence, moss-filled cradles, and perfectly reasonable midwinter divorces. You hear someone laughing near the loom. Not giggling. Laughing with the kind of relaxed power that says, "I once divorced my husband in front of 12 witnesses and kept his goats." You inch closer. Let's begin with a mainstream historical fact. Viking women, at least in the Scandinavian homelands, had more legal rights than most of their European counterparts. They could own property. They could inherit land. They could divorce their husbands. They could even reclaim their dowries if the marriage didn't work out. And yes, they could also murder their spouses in particularly creative sagas, but we'll stick to the sleep-friendly bits for now. You walk slowly across packed dirt floors, your feet crunching on herbs tossed there to freshen the air. Every step takes you deeper into the rhythm of a Viking woman's day. Churning butter, dyeing wool, deciding whether her husband's tendency to sulk when he lost at Nefadafel is grounds for separation. All valid. You settle beside a carved wooden chest where legal scrolls called law sticks are kept. In the Icelandic Grágis law code, divorce was as simple as making a public statement. Seriously. If a woman wanted out, she just had to declare it in front of witnesses, usually at the couple's threshold or local assembly, and that was it. No trial. No drawn-out court battles. Just, "I'm leaving. I take my key ring and my dignity. Good day." Quirky detail? Women's key rings were symbolic and literal. A married Norse woman wore her household keys on her belt. It meant she controlled the home, the stores, the supplies. Taking them off wasn't just annoying, it was political. If she handed them back, it signaled a massive shift. If she kept them? Well, good luck getting back in, Thorfinn. You run a finger along the rim of a drinking horn. The hall smells of pine sap, fermented fish, and something gently roasted. Above the hearth, someone's boiling a pot of herbs to soothe childbirth pain. You marvel at how midwives blended folk remedies, whispered charms, and straight-up grit to bring new life into the world. And yet, historians still argue whether Viking women truly had autonomy across all regions or whether this relative freedom was more myth than norm, something idealized in sagas rather than practiced in daily life. There's ongoing debate over whether laws favoring women were widespread or more isolated to Iceland, where records were more detailed. Still, the stories persist, like the one about Unn the Deep-Minded, a widowed noblewoman who sailed to Iceland, claimed land, built a dynasty, and was buried in a ship like a chieftain. Or Freydis Eriksdottir, who supposedly chased off warriors while heavily pregnant, brandishing a sword and calling them cowards. Just normal Tuesday things. You duck outside briefly into the snow. It's so quiet out here, only the crackle of frost and the creak of your own boots. In the distance, a woman sharpens a blade while humming. Not because she's planning anything, mind you. It's just chore rotation day. Back inside, a grandmother braids a child's hair while telling tales of sea serpents and trolls. Someone plays a lyre near the fire. The room glows golden, heavy with warmth and the occasional sarcastic eye roll when a young man suggests he should lead the next trade voyage. You realize these women didn't just run the home. They ran the story. They were guardians of memory, lore keepers, spinners of both wool and myth. They embroidered tales into clothing and kept whole genealogies in their heads. If a man returned from a failed raid, bruised and empty-handed, there was a decent chance his wife had negotiated a better deal at the seasonal market while he was gone. She might greet him with a smile, a fresh cloak, and a subtle reminder that she's got options. The fire pops. You close your eyes beside the coals, listening to the quiet strength in the room. No shouting, no rushing. Just the hum of a society that, for all its rough edges, recognized that sometimes the fiercest warriors wore aprons and held ladles instead of axes. You sleep easily now, dreaming of keys jangling on belts and quiet footsteps walking away, not in shame or fear, but with confidence, purpose, and a fully itemized dowry list. You're jolted awake by the toll of a bell, not a pleasant chime, mind you, but the grim, hollow clang of a medieval cathedral tower echoing through stone alleys. The air smells faintly of wax, damp limestone, and incense that's doing a very poor job of covering up the stench of rotting flesh. Oh, right, you're in 9th century Rome. And today you are attending a courtroom drama unlike any in history because the accused is very much dead. Tonight, you'll watch as a pope drags a corpse into court, props it up on a throne, and proceeds to scream at it. And no, you're not dreaming. At least not yet. You trudge forward through a crowd that's pressed tightly against the walls of a basilica. Everyone's whispering. Their breath fogs in the air. Children are hoisted onto shoulders, not because anyone wants them to witness this, but because, well, it's not every day a decomposing former pope gets sued post-mortem. Let's start with a mainstream historical fact. In the year 897, Pope Stephen VI ordered what's now called the Cadaver Synod, a real, documented event in which the corpse of Pope Formosus was exhumed and put on trial for crimes against canon law. That's right. Not a metaphor, not a symbolic rite. The literal body was propped up on a chair and dressed in papal robes while a living pope yelled legal accusations at it. You can almost hear the flies. A few monks look visibly distressed. One quietly vomits into a bucket. A cardinal fans himself with a prayer book. Your nostrils twitch. Formosus had only been dead for about 9 months, but the Roman climate is not known for preserving bodies. His hands are blackened. His face is sunken. And Pope Stephen, in full regalia, is now pacing like a prosecuting attorney in a low-budget court drama. Do you, Stephen Thunders, confess that you accepted the bishopric of Porto while still seeking the papal throne? The corpse says nothing, because of course it doesn't. And here's your quirky tidbit. The corpse didn't even get to speak for itself. Shocker. A deacon was appointed to serve as its defense, basically acting as a mouthpiece for the deceased. Historians are still baffled whether the man spoke in first person, "I did not do such things, Your Holiness," or if he nervously used third person like, Formosus respectfully declines to comment. You imagine the scene as absurdly theatrical, somewhere between a Shakespearean farce and a really bad puppet show. One scholar, writing centuries later, claimed that Stephen had gone temporarily mad with political rage. Others think it was more strategic in an attempt to undo Formosus's decisions, especially his ordination of bishops whom Stephen disliked. And yet, historians still argue whether the Cadaver Synod was entirely orchestrated by Pope Stephen alone or whether he was pressured by powerful Roman families trying to erase Formosus's influence from the church. Some accounts suggest he was a puppet himself, ironically, and fell victim to the very politics he tried to manipulate. You shift uncomfortably on a wooden bench, half expecting the corpse to suddenly gesture dramatically and shout objection. But alas, rigor mortis remains undefeated. Eventually, the trial ends with the inevitable verdict, guilty. Pope Stephen orders the corpse stripped of its papal robes, the fingers used for blessings cut off, because why not mutilate the dead while you're at it, and the body tossed into the Tiber River. For a few days, Rome seems to breathe easier, until, of course, the body washes back ashore. Because nothing says divine retribution like a bloated, fingerless pontiff floating into town like he forgot his subway stop. In a bizarre turn of fate, Pope Stephen's actions horrify the Roman populace. Within months, he's overthrown, imprisoned, and eventually strangled in his cell. Talk about court karma. You sit quietly, the basilica now empty, the corpse long gone, the benches creaking softly under imagined weight. You wonder how a city once at the center of the Roman Empire ended up here, trying dead men in public. But the answer is sleepily simple: politics. Old grudges. The very human need to control a narrative, even after death. You walk slowly through the cathedral courtyard. The sky above Rome glows a sleepy gold. Doves coo in the rafters. A dog barks half-heartedly. Somewhere, someone is washing a robe, trying to scrub out the memory of today. You reach the fountain, place your hand in the water, and exhale. History doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it's not even trying. Sometimes it's just tired popes, rotting corpses, and very confused deacons doing their best with a legal script no one should have written. And somehow, all of it leads you closer to sleep. Because what's more relaxing than the absurdity of it all? You're reminded that even the mightiest powers can crumble into theater. And that even the loudest accusations fade into silence when the lights dim and the candles gutter out. You blink and find yourself standing in a silk-draped hallway that smells faintly of jasmine, ink, and formal terror. Carpets so thick you lose your feet. Lanterns glowing with a soft orange light, casting long, fish-like shadows on the walls. There's not a sound, only the gentle shuffle of cloth-slippered feet. You're in the Forbidden City and the Emperor has summoned you. Well, sort of. Tonight, you're about to witness one of the strangest bureaucratic ecosystems in human history, a 12-year-old boy sitting on a dragon throne, ruling a population of millions with the help of more than 30,000 eunuchs. And yes, that's a real number. You shuffle along behind a procession of palace attendants who won't look you in the eye. They're too busy looking at the floor, the ceiling, or nowhere in particular, because here, in the heart of Ming Dynasty Beijing, looking in the wrong direction could get you whipped. Or worse, reassigned to latrine detail during a summer banquet. You finally arrive at the Hall of Supreme Harmony, where everything smells like cedar, candle wax, and the accumulated tension of 600 years of absolute monarchy. The throne looms in front of you, carved from sandalwood, covered in golden dragons. And on it, a child. He fidgets. His robes are too big. His hat is slipping sideways. His eyes glance nervously toward an older eunuch standing nearby, a man who looks like he hasn't blinked since the Song Dynasty. Let's start with your mainstream fact. During the height of the Ming Dynasty, especially in the 15th and 16th centuries, the Chinese imperial court was staffed by tens of thousands of eunuchs. Castrated men entrusted with everything from managing kitchens and scrolls to whispering advice directly into the emperor's ear. One such eunuch, Wei Zhongxian, became so powerful that by the 1620s, he essentially ran the empire through a teenage puppet emperor. He demanded temples be built in his name, banished critics to remote provinces, and reportedly punished anyone who questioned his honor by stuffing their mouths with ink-soaked paper before exile. Fringe tidbit: some eunuchs held secret grudges for decades and would go to absurd lengths to take revenge, like rearranging ancestral tombs of rival officials, a serious offense in Confucian tradition, or feeding their enemy's favorite bird opium-laced rice. That last one? Not confirmed, but whispered. And that's enough. You step further into the throne room, noticing the peculiar hush. The boy emperor raises a hand, a weak little wave that stops mid-air. Immediately, 5 eunuchs step forward to fan him, mist his face, adjust his sleeve, and blot his forehead with silk. You wonder if he even knows how to scratch his own nose anymore. Here's the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the eunuchs of imperial China were truly the scheming, shadowy manipulators many Confucian scholars portrayed them to be, or whether they were scapegoats for deeper bureaucratic failings and power struggles between court factions. Some records describe them as devout, loyal stewards, Others paint them as leeches in brocade robes. The truth, like many things in history, is probably somewhere in the middle, an uneasy mixture of survival, ambition, and exploitation. You trail behind a servant carrying a tray of scrolls, past courtyards filled with trimmed bonsai and pools of red carp that seem to listen as much as swim. Above you, the stars begin to peek through the haze. You wonder how often the emperor gets to look up at them. Probably never. He's surrounded all day, every day, by whispers and bows and endless layers of protocol. Even his bedtime is scheduled by a clockmaker who's never seen him sleep. One of the more absurd facts? The imperial wardrobe system alone had a department of over 100 eunuchs, just for robes. Their job was to ensure the emperor wore the correct seasonal, ceremonial, and astrological garments at all times. If they got it wrong, heads rolled. Silk-starched ones. You're ushered into a smaller chamber where lesser officials debate calendar alignments and auspicious tea temperatures. A eunuch takes notes. Another applies rouge to the emperor's cheeks. Not for beauty, but to make sure he appears radiant with virtue during official audiences. And you're exhausted just watching it all. Later, as the palace quiets, you slip through the sleeping quarters of junior eunuchs. They talk in whispers, sip warm water, and tell stories about emperors past. How one liked to fly kites from the roof, how another kept a zoo of trained crickets, how another vanished for 2 weeks to live incognito in the spice markets of Nanjing. Is any of it true? Historians still argue whether the boundaries between emperor and legend were ever truly firm. When everyone around you is paid to flatter, fabricate, or falsify, the line between truth and myth blurs faster than ink on damp parchment. You lie back on a lacquered bench and listen to the distant hum of palace life. The walls are thick, but the whispers slip through. Somewhere, someone's trimming a bonsai by moonlight. A tea kettle hisses. The emperor sleeps beneath a silk canopy, guarded by men who will never know fatherhood, only obedience. And somehow it's also quiet, so controlled, so dizzyingly unreal that your mind begins to drift. Because here in the palace of rules, rituals, and robed intrigue, the most powerful person alive is barely old enough to ride a horse. And everyone else? They're just playing the world's longest, most elaborate game of make-believe. You close your eyes, let the hush of the forbidden city blanket you like imperial brocade. Let the fanning of invisible servants cool your thoughts. Let the red carp swim in your dreams, and sleep. You wake to the gentle rustle of straw and the faint scent of damp earth. A rooster crows somewhere nearby, far too early for comfort, and you instinctively pull your hood a little tighter. Not because of the cold, but because you suspect one of your neighbors is trying to curse you. Yes, again. Tonight, you're nestled in the narrow lanes of a medieval European village, one of those cozy, timber-framed, soot-smudged hamlets where gossip spreads faster than fire in a thatch-roof tavern. Everyone knows everyone. And unfortunately, everyone suspects everyone of witchcraft, including you. Let's say your goat gave sour milk, or your child got a fever. Or, worse, your barley fermented too fast and now smells like fish. In this century, you don't blame bad luck, bacteria, or the rising moon cycle. No, you blame Gertrude, your neighbor who always mutters into her turnips and once accidentally called your baby a smallish toad. So what do? You hang a dried weasel foot over your doorway, bury an onion in your threshold, sprinkle ash in a circle around your well, and sleep with a knife under your pillow, blade pointing east. All completely normal. Let's begin with a mainstream historical fact. In many medieval European communities, belief in everyday magic and household curses was not fringe, it was common sense. From the 11th through 15th centuries, both peasants and aristocrats alike routinely practiced forms of folk prophylaxis to prevent illness, crop failure, or romantic misfortune. And no one batted an eye. Your cousin broke a leg? You obviously forgot to hang garlic over the pigsty last new moon. That's on you. But here's a fringe tidbit. In 14th century Wales, some households brewed a witch-warding beer infused with iron nails, nettle seeds, and horsehair, then poured it around the perimeter of their home while reciting specific phrases backward. According to some chronicles, this concoction froze the eyes of jealousy. According to modern historians, it likely just confused the chickens. You pass the village well and spot a bundle hanging from the handle, an egg wrapped in black wool, tied with twine and splashed with wax. A classic curse bundle. Someone's angry. Probably about cheese. Again, you keep walking. At the market, you hear whispers about the baker's wife. Her bread hasn't risen properly in weeks. Suspicious. You nod sympathetically, then quietly slip a sprig of St. John's wort into your cloak, just in case she looks at you too long. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether most medieval villagers truly believed in the supernatural effectiveness of these protective rituals, or whether they performed them more out of habit, social pressure, or sheer anxiety. Was it genuine fear? A psychological placebo? A neighborly competition to show you were just a little more protected than the smith across the lane? You pass a stone cottage where dried herbs dangle like wind chimes from every window. Inside, the midwife is chanting over a spoon. She claims it prevents nosebleeds. You're not convinced, but you don't say anything because she also predicted your cousin's broken leg 2 weeks before it happened. Coincidence? Maybe. Still, you're starting to feel that tickle at the back of your throat. The one that says someone might have looked at your sheep with a little too much longing. Back at your own home, you sweep the threshold 3 times counterclockwise before stepping inside. You spit in the fire. You whisper your aunt's name while tying knots into a string. You don't fully remember what this last ritual does, but it was in your grandmother's notebook, and that woman never had a single rotten apple. Then you check your family's most important possession, the household charm book. Bound in goatskin, stained with something you'd rather not identify, and filled with inked instructions like, to keep envy away, bury 9 rusty spoons beneath the cowshed. For unwanted affection, rub frog spittle behind both ears. To prevent baldness and legal troubles, wear a chicken feather in your sock. As the sun dips behind the hills, the village gets quieter but never silent. A cow moos. Someone drops a bucket. An old woman coughs behind her curtain 3 times sharply. You stiffen. That's the cough of warning. You check your window latch and draw your curtain. Not because of bandits, not even wolves, but because if someone slips a hex pouch under your doorstep tonight, and you step over it without noticing, you might wake up tomorrow with a mouth full of bees, or believe your own shadow is following you, or just feel a little more tired, a little more unlucky. And medieval people hated feeling unlucky. Some households even kept curse mirrors, tiny silver discs said to reflect malice back onto the sender. Others placed clay figurines in hidden alcoves, representing their enemies, broken limb by limb when times got hard. Modern psychologists would call this ritualized externalization. Medieval folks called it Tuesday. As the fire dies down, you stretch out on your straw mattress beneath a thick wool blanket that still smells like the sheep it came from. You listen to the wind brushing against the shutters, wondering if that soft thump outside was just a log shifting or something more pointed. You don't want to risk it, so you whisper one more charm, something about feathers and firelight, and drift off into the kind of sleep only someone hex-free can enjoy. Because here in your tiny village, nestled in superstition and soot, avoiding a curse isn't about being brave. It's about being careful, and you're nothing if not careful. You descend carefully, slowly down a slanted stone ramp. The air grows heavy. Still, almost sweet. You're deep beneath the desert floor now, somewhere in the hidden vaults of a New Kingdom necropolis, chasing a scent you can't name. It isn't floral. It isn't spicy. It's older than that. Dusty, golden, and resinous, like sunlight trapped in honey and buried under time. You've found something strange. Not gold. Not scrolls. Not cursed mummies waiting to wake up dramatically. You've watched enough movies to know that's not how this works. What you've found is perfume. Dozens of alabaster flasks sealed with beeswax. Carved cedar chests filled with dried petals and hardened oils. Tiny reed baskets holding the powdered remnants of lilies, saffron, and something that smells vaguely like pine and goat. Tonight, you're in one of ancient Egypt's best-kept olfactory secrets, the Royal Perfume Vault. Because yes, the pharaohs hoarded scents. Mainstream historical fact. In New Kingdom Egypt, roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE, perfume wasn't just a luxury, it was sacred. Fragrances were burned in temples as offerings, applied during royal anointments, and used to embalm the dead. Certain scents were believed to connect humans with gods, especially those associated with Osiris, Hathor, and Baadet, which means you're currently surrounded by ingredients meant to sanctify kings and charm the divine. You crack open one flask. Don't worry, gently. And the room fills with a musky sweetness, possibly kiffy, a ceremonial blend containing myrrh, raisins, wine, cinnamon, frankincense, and honey. Historians still argue whether the exact recipe changed based on the lunar calendar, the temple it was produced in, or simply the priest's mood. You inhale again, and it feels like time slows. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some Egyptologists believe that pharaohs were buried with personalized signature scents, a kind of posthumous cologne. One particular tomb near the Valley of the Queens revealed jars labeled only with the word breath, which many scholars interpret as the name of a scent intended to revive the soul in eternity. You wander deeper into the vault, running your fingers across the cool limestone shelves. Some are inscribed with floral hieroglyphs, blue lotus, papyrus, date blossom. Others bear cryptic phrases like fragrance of the sky or oil for joy. In one corner, wrapped in linen, you find a bundle of spikenard root from the Levant. It smells like earth after rain, woody, dark, and bittersweet. Next to it, a cracked bottle of labdanum resin, sticky and rich like sun-baked tar mixed with sugar. This isn't just luxury, this is olfactory spell work. Ancient Egyptian perfumers, called kapet makers, were part alchemists, part priests. They used heated stone bowls to coax oils from petals, infused them with fats, sealed them with beeswax, and aged them in clay for months. Some perfumes were kept under lock and key, reserved for divine rites and high-ranking officials. But it wasn't all temple magic. Some of it was just good old-fashioned vanity. Elite Egyptian women, and plenty of men, wore wax cones of perfumed fat on their wigs, which slowly melted in the heat and released a scent cloud as they walked. Imagine that at your next office meeting. There's one bottle you can't stop staring at. It's etched with a falcon and sealed with something like pitch. You pop it open and the aroma is sharp and bracing, possibly an early menthol or eucalyptus import from Nubia or further south. Some scholars think this scent was used in ritual awakenings or during coronation rites to open the senses. Or maybe it was just what passed for breath freshener after a long chariot ride. Either way, it works. You pause for a moment. Something occurs to you. What would your signature scent be if you were being embalmed tonight? Something relaxing, surely. But would it be myrrh and cinnamon? Or mint and riverstone? Let's not think too hard about the embalming part. Instead, you note how quiet this vault is. Not silent, just settled. As if the stone remembers every scent that passed through. As if the air itself has become viscous, thick with thousands of years of ceremonial aroma. You find a broken piece of papyrus tucked behind one of the scent jars. It lists in scribbled ink, oil of celebration, breath of dawn, gift to the river, sand oil for sleep. You make a mental note to trademark sand oil for sleep. Could be a hit. Still, there's something eerie about how personal all this feels. These scents weren't just for seduction or hygiene. They were memories in liquid form. Time capsules. Invisible legacies. And in the middle of it all stands a small, smooth pedestal with no label. Just a pool of hardened resin at its center. Deep red and glossy. You lean in, take a breath. Clove? Cinnamon? Date syrup? No. It's something you can't place, which is the best kind of smell. The kind that makes you pause. That transports you without warning. The kind that, in a world without cameras or voice memos, was the only way to remember someone. Even a pharaoh. And as you turn to leave the vault, stepping carefully past the jars and flasks, letting the last breath of scent cling to your robes, you wonder whether anyone will smell like this again. Maybe not, but tonight, for just a few dreamy moments, you did. You shuffle through a cramped, lamplit corridor, one shoulder brushing against the damp stone wall. Somewhere above your head, in the cluttered maze of Constantinople's Palace of Magnora, a clerk sneezes into his robe and swears in Greek. It smells like ink, parchment, and frustration. Congratulations. You've wandered straight into the most dangerous corner of the Byzantine Empire, not the battlefield, not a throne room bristling with poisoned goblets and scheming cousins, but the records office. And tonight, we're following the trail of a very particular paper pusher. A man whose name you've likely never heard. Whose signature perhaps outlived him by centuries. The man who tried quietly, absurdly, to make Byzantine paperwork fireproof. You're welcome. Mainstream historical fact: the Byzantine bureaucracy was notorious for its complexity, obsessive documentation, and total resistance to change. A single imperial order might travel through dozens of departments, each adding its own notes, stamps, and opinions in red ink. Some edicts had margins thicker than the main text. But it wasn't just Byzantine pettiness at play, it was self-defense. You see, fires were constant in Constantinople. Whole neighborhoods could vanish in a night, including, yes, government archives. The imperial chancery lost at least 3 full wings to citywide fires during the 9th and 10th centuries. And that's where our star appears. Fringe tidbit. One anonymous court functionary, nicknamed by modern historians as the Ink Rat, began experimenting with early fire-retardant materials in secret. And not for anything glamorous. He just didn't want to rewrite tax rolls for the 7th time that year. According to the marginalia of a surviving parchment from 932 CE, he tested scrolls coated in vinegar, gypsum powder, and diluted egg white. The result? Ugly, stinky, slightly shiny pages that didn't burn as easily. They curled, sure. They smoked. But they survived. Historians still argue whether this fireproof formula was an accident, a deliberate innovation, or just a wine-addled fever dream copied by a tired apprentice. But it worked. For a little while. You creep into his old office now, long abandoned, probably repurposed as a mop closet. It's a marvel of petty obsessiveness. 17 wooden drawers. 10 styluses hanging on tiny hooks. A stone inkwell carved into a seal shape. On the wall, the faded ghost of a sign reads, "Do not smudge what God has recorded." You squint. There's a roll of parchment stuffed into the back of one drawer, its edges crisp but intact. On the front, a property dispute between two melon farmers from 927 CE. Riveting stuff. But the real wonder is the faint shimmer on the page. That telltale eggy gloss. You pick it up. It's weirdly sturdy. Papery leather. A century later, the trick was forgotten. Too costly. Too time-consuming. Also, the recipe stank. But for a brief shining window, Constantinople scribes had armor for their scrolls. Imagine that. A city famed for double crosses, silk smugglers, and cathedral mosaics, and here's a clerk quietly fireproofing melon complaints. Sometimes the heroes don't wear crowns. They wear ink stains. In fact, here's a popular theory among very bored academics that this formula, or a version of it, may have influenced early parchment coatings used in monastic libraries across Europe. The idea of treating sacred manuscripts with protective washes, vinegar and ash, resin and water appears in several 11th century codices. Coincidence? Or just a whisper from Byzantium? Either way, you're starting to suspect something profound, that some of the greatest acts of preservation aren't grand. They're quiet, repetitive, smelly. They involve crushed eggs and mildewed drawers. You fan through a few more documents, census tallies, monastery inventories. One extremely passive-aggressive note about missing stylus caps. One line catches your eye. Scribbled in the margins. Let the ink endure if the city falls. Let the names survive the flame. Poetic. For a bureaucrat, you close the drawer. The lamp guttering beside you throws warm light on the dusty ledgers. And you wonder, not for the first time tonight, how many forgotten geniuses wore sandals instead of laurels. Sat at desks instead of thrones. Invented paper shields in a world of fire and ambition. You brush aside a trailing vine and find yourself face to face with what looks like a garden wall, but this one hums. Not literally, but in a strangely satisfying way, like it remembers every droplet of rain it's ever absorbed. The bricks are sun-warmed and damp to the touch. And embedded in the mortar, just barely visible if you squint in the dappled light, is something far too clever for its time. Tonight, you are standing in the shadow of Lucius Vibius Cortinus's greatest and oddest legacy, the wall that watered itself. Mainstream historical fact. The Romans were freakishly advanced when it came to aqueducts. You probably already know about the soaring arches, gravity-fed channels, and mosaicked bathhouses filled by spring-fed engineering. What you might not know is that some Romans experimented with micro-irrigation systems. Not for farms. Not for vineyards. For their walls. And no, this wasn't imperial excess. Lucius was no emperor. He was a middle-class engineer from Hispania sent to a provincial post near modern-day southern France in the 2nd century CE. His job? Maintain villa infrastructure. Fix stone leaks. Keep patrician fountains gurgling on schedule. Fringe tidbit. But Lucius had a side project, documented in fragments of letters and inscriptions, that involved building vertical garden features that soaked up rainwater, stored it internally, and slowly released it to nourish the vines growing along them. Think a kind of primitive green wall minus the Pinterest aesthetic and automatic timers. One of his earliest designs involved hollow clay tubes set inside a brick lattice. Rain would enter through the top via a decorative lion's mouth, of course, and collect in a chamber filled with porous volcanic rock. The wall would then slowly leach moisture into the surrounding soil through thin capillaries. Over time, ivy crept up the wall like grateful hands reaching toward the sky. Historians still argue whether Lucius's wall was ever mass-produced or just a one-off curiosity he built behind his house to impress dinner guests. Some claim a surviving wall in modern-day Alls fits the description, though its inner workings remain sealed in lime and moss. You walk along the base of that very wall now, perhaps. It smells faintly of sage and old limestone. The ivy overhead rustles even though there's no wind. You swear for a moment you can hear the faint drip-drip of internal memory. Modern hydrologists would lose their minds over this thing. Centuries ahead of its time, it suggests an understanding of water cycles and capillary action that historians didn't think Romans possessed. It also hints at something else, a quiet lifestyle of delight in domestic marvels. Lucius wasn't trying to revolutionize the empire. He was trying to keep his geraniums alive during a drought. And this detail, you realize, is what makes ancient history so weirdly soothing. It's not the conquests, the battles, the amphorae full of olive oil. It's the tiny, human, profoundly reasonable urge to solve a problem with just enough genius to make your neighbors jealous. One letter from Lucius, preserved in wax tablet fragments found in southern Gaul, mentions a complaint from a villa guest who became suspicious of the vines, for they never seemed to suffer in the sun. He replied, apparently, they are grateful. I made their thirst my concern. Imagine being that poetic about your backyard wall. And yet, there's a lesson here. The ancients weren't just philosophers and soldiers. Some were irrigation nerds, brick whisperers, water magicians in tunics. You crouch at the base of the wall. The stones are smooth, as if worn by centuries of patient water flow. One tiny pink flower pokes through a crevice, thriving in silence. In a world that often measured power in columns and catapults, Lucius measured it in droplets. Remember the Byzantine scribes' vinegar-treated parchments? This is the same spirit. Quiet preservation, functional beauty, unthroned brilliance. You lean against the wall and feel the sun-damp warmth in your spine. Somewhere, centuries ago, Lucius grins in dusty satisfaction. Because in the end, greatness doesn't always echo in marble halls. Sometimes it drips slowly through a garden wall, feeding ivy. The moon is high, and you step through an archway carved not of marble or sandstone, but of volcanic stone, cool to the touch and ink-black even under starlight. You are no longer in the Roman world or the winding alleys of North Africa. Now you're in the tropics, thick air, buzzing crickets, and a landscape steeped in incense and whispered legends. You've entered ancient Java, and tonight you meet the queen who ruled with shadows. She isn't written into most textbooks. You won't find her next to Cleopatra or Wu Zetian or Empress Matilda. But in the courts of 10th century central Java within the Hindu-Buddhist kingdom of Mataram, a woman known as Queen Sima once reigned with a power that would ripple down through oral history like incense smoke curling through teakwood rafters. Mainstream historical fact, the Mataram kingdom was a real powerhouse in Southeast Asia, predating the better-known Majapahit Empire and building some of the most stunning stonework in the ancient world, including the famous Borobudur temple. Though male kings are better recorded in steles and ruins, Queen Sima stands apart. Reputedly reigning during the 7th century, her story persisted for centuries through shadow puppetry and palm leaf manuscripts, blurring the lines between myth and monarchy. Fringe tidbit: according to Javanese legend, Queen Sima once passed an extreme moral test. A foreign trader left a sack of gold at a crossroads within her domain, deliberately to test the locals. It lay untouched for years until one of her own royal guards accidentally brushed it with his foot while sweeping. Instead of praising his restraint, Queen Sima sentenced him to death. This might sound heartless until you hear the twist. When ministers begged her for mercy, she compromised. Only the man's toe would be cut off. The rest of him was spared. A truly Javanese solution, justice with a side of symbolic drama. Historians still argue whether Queen Sima was a real sovereign or a legendary personification of idealized justice. Some believe her story is allegorical, a narrative built to frame early Mataram values of honesty, obedience, and moral absolutism. Others argue that she was a real historical ruler whose deeds were mythologized beyond recognition, as so often happens with powerful women surrounded by whispering courtiers and scribes who favored swords over ink. But it's not her justice alone that defines her reign. It's her use of wayang kulit, the famed Javanese shadow puppet theater. These intricate leather silhouettes held against glowing banana leaf screens were more than entertainment. They were how royal decrees were softened, how criticisms of court life were aired safely, and how divine lineage was reinforced through symbolic storytelling. You sit now in one such chamber. The air smells like sandalwood and fermented rice. A Dalong, the master puppeteer, chants softly, barely above a whisper, as leather shadows dance across the screen. The queen sits veiled in the back of the pavilion, watching her court's conscience unfold in metaphor. No direct commands. No thunderous proclamations, just shadows and stories. And through this medium, Queen Sima governed hearts as well as minds. This technique worked because of the deeply spiritual worldview of her people. Everything was dual, light and shadow, woman and man, discipline and forgiveness. So, to rule with shadows was not to deceive, it was to reveal a truth too powerful for direct speech. You glance at the puppet silhouettes. One is a noble bird. One is a greedy merchant. One is a queen whose hand glows faintly gold under the lamplight. Back in her palace, Queen Sima's court was known for its restraint. Historical accounts, again, blurry with folklore, say her advisors rarely raised their voices. Even arguments were staged as quiet rituals. If someone lost their temper, they were asked to fast in the garden until their spirit cooled. The result? A kind of sleepy wisdom, a governance built on ceremony and indirectness, where every move had to pass through layers of metaphor like a dream you wake up still half-living. One tale claims that Queen Sima never raised her voice, not once. Even when sentencing a man to partial toe amputation. Her voice was said to be so calm, birds would fly into the courtroom rafters just to hear her speak. You lean back, letting the sounds of gamelan instruments wash over you. Soft metallic chimes, hollow bamboo rhythms, and beyond it all, the gentle rustle of palm leaves. Some rulers burned cities. Some built walls. Queen Sima built reverence quietly, invisibly, beautifully. And now, as the shadow play ends, you understand. The queen didn't rule with iron or gold. She ruled with shadows, ephemeral, graceful, and utterly unforgettable. You trudge through the dusty streets of 9th century Baghdad, the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, a city buzzing with scholars, poets, and inventors. The sun warms your back as the call to prayer fades, replaced by the gentle murmur of fountains and the clatter of merchants setting up their stalls. Today, you're headed to the House of Wisdom, where minds sharper than any sword gather to unlock the secrets of the universe. Among these brilliant minds is a philosopher known less for his poetry or theology and more for his whimsical yet precise inventions, a man named Al-Jazari. But this isn't just any inventor. You've come to see his latest masterpiece, a water clock that doesn't just tell time but sings with the voices of mechanical owls. Mainstream historical fact: Al-Jazari, living during the 12th and 13th centuries, was a polymath who authored the Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. Among his creations were elaborate water clocks, automata, and even early programmable machines. His work laid the foundation for modern robotics and engineering. Quirky tidbit: one of his most famous clocks featured mechanical musicians, tiny automata that played instruments, including a group of owls whose hoots marked the passing hours. This wasn't just a timekeeping device. It was an elaborate performance, blending art, science, and spectacle. Historians still argue whether Al-Jazari's clocks were practical timekeepers or primarily intended as royal entertainments. Some believe the complexity made them more ornamental than functional, while others credit them as pioneering feats of engineering that influenced timekeeping devices for centuries. You stand before this clock, a wooden and brass marvel adorned with intricate calligraphy and delicate filigree. Water flows steadily through its channels, powering gears and levers that animate the figures. As the hour approaches, the owls stir, their wooden wings flapping gently as they open their beaks to release haunting, melodic hoots that echo softly through the chamber. The melody is oddly soothing, a lullaby of mechanics and nature entwined. You find yourself mesmerized, the steady rhythm coaxing your mind toward calm reflection. This clock isn't just about marking time, it's a reminder of the harmony between man, machine, and the natural world, a poetic fusion designed to make the abstract concept of time tangible and beautiful. In the bustling city beyond, scholars debate the nature of time itself, whether it flows linearly like the water in the clock or exists as a series of eternal moments. The mechanical owls, they say, are a metaphor for wisdom observing the passage of life. You linger in this quiet reverence, feeling the gentle pulse of history's heartbeat, ticking in sync with your own. You find yourself standing at the edge of a vast, shimmering lake in the heart of the ancient Valley of Mexico. The air is thick with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly turned earth. Around you, canals ripple gently, reflecting a sky streaked with soft pastels as the sun dips low. This is Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, and you are about to explore the fabled gardens where emperors retreated from the bustle of court life to a secret Eden. Mainstream historical fact: the Aztecs were master gardeners, creating chinampas, floating gardens built on reed mats anchored in the lake that supported intensive agriculture and ornamental horticulture alike. These gardens supplied food and medicine and provided serene spaces for contemplation and ritual. Quirky tidbit: among the ornamental plants, Aztec emperors prized the flower of the dead, Cempasúchil, believed to guide souls to the afterlife. The gardens were not just earthly delights but spiritual landscapes carefully designed to bridge life and death. Historians still argue whether these imperial gardens were strictly utilitarian agricultural plots or also functioned as elaborate symbolic environments embodying Aztec cosmology and political power. You walk along narrow stone paths bordered by beds of marigolds and orchids, their petals glowing faintly in the twilight. Small pools mirror the clouds and carved stone fountains murmur quietly. In the distance, you glimpse a pavilion where the emperor may have sat, gazing over lotus blossoms and listening to the distant song of a flute. The air hums softly with the buzz of hummingbirds darting between blossoms, their iridescent feathers flickering like tiny flames. You imagine the emperor here, far from the weight of empire, breathing in the fragrance of jasmine and chocolate trees, perhaps reflecting on the cycles of nature and rulership. These gardens were carefully curated, plants chosen for their beauty, their symbolism, and their practical uses. Beyond mere decoration, each flower, herb, and fruit carried meaning in Aztec belief. The very layout was said to mirror the structure of the universe, with canals representing rivers of life and stone paths marking the journey of the soul. You hear the soft splash of water and catch a glimpse of a brightly colored bird, perhaps a quetzal, fluttering among the branches. The moment is peaceful, almost timeless. And yet, scholars continue to debate how much of this garden was open to the public and how much was an exclusive sanctuary. Was it a place of political theater as much as personal retreat? The lines blur as much as the water's reflection. You pause, feeling the gentle coolness of the evening air and the quiet wisdom of a lost paradise, carried forward only in stories, soil, and stone. You trudge through the snow-dusted forests of Scandinavia, the sharp crunch of your boots muffled by a whispering wind that carries the faint glow of the northern lights overhead. The sky dances with swirling greens and purples, casting an ethereal glow over the timber longhouses nestled among frosted pines. Inside one such home, a family prepares for nightfall in a world where sleep is less about rest and more about ritual. Mainstream historical fact: Vikings often slept in close quarters on animal skins within longhouses where the hearth fire's warmth was vital during the long, harsh winters. Sleep was intertwined with rituals involving dreams, which were believed to carry messages from the gods. Quirky tidbit: some Viking sagas suggest warriors wore amulets or kept carved runes by their beds to influence their dreams or ward off nightmares. Dream incubation was practiced, placing a sacred object under the pillow to invite prophetic visions. Historians still argue whether Viking sleep customs were uniform across regions or varied significantly by clan, status, and season. You settle beside a glowing fire, its amber light flickering over carved wooden beams and thick wool blankets. The air smells of pine resin and smoked fish, and the distant howl of wolves blends with the crackle of burning logs. A family member places a small carved wooden bear under a child's pillow, whispering a blessing for peaceful dreams and protection against the Jotnar giants who roam the night. Sleep here is not just a biological necessity but a gateway to other realms. You imagine the eldest telling tales of Odin's quest for wisdom, reminding listeners that the god himself sacrificed an eye to gain knowledge and often appeared in dreams. The line between waking and dreaming blurs under the northern lights. As you close your eyes, the aurora's glow seeps through the window, casting shifting shadows that seem to dance with ancient spirits. The chill outside contrasts with the warmth of hearth and heart inside, inviting you into a realm where dreams are as real as the waking world. Vikings believed that proper sleep and dreams could influence one's fate. The concept of Filja, a spirit companion often revealed in dreams, was central to personal destiny. You wonder, did those shadows dancing on the walls carry whispers of such spirits? Scholars debate whether these sleep rituals were widely practiced or mainly preserved in poetic lore. The truth, like the northern lights themselves, flickers just beyond grasp. You breathe in the smoky warmth, feeling the rhythm of centuries-old nightfall settle around you, soft and timeless. You find yourself seated in a dimly lit Victorian parlor where the gentle ticking of a mahogany clock mixes with the soft clink of fine china. The air is rich with the scent of bergamot and lavender, and plush velvet drapes pool gracefully by the windows. Outside, gas lamps flicker along cobblestone streets, while inside, the ritual of tea time transitions into the quiet customs of bedtime in an era obsessed with propriety and tranquility. Mainstream historical fact: in Victorian England, elaborate bedtime rituals were common, including drinking calming herbal teas like chamomile or lavender, donning specially designed nightclothes, and the use of scented sachets to aid restful sleep. Quirky tidbit: some Victorians believed that wearing magic or specially blessed pajamas could ward off nightmares, while others used bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals, to chase away the cold of drafty bedrooms. Historians still argue whether Victorian sleep hygiene genuinely improved health or merely reflected social status and superstition. You imagine the household maid carefully preparing a pot of tea infused with valerian root, the herb's earthy aroma filling the air. The lady of the house reclines on a fainting couch, her silk nightgown rustling softly as she settles in, the gentle folds promising a night of peace. Nearby, a drawer creaks open to reveal a collection of delicate lavender sachets tucked beneath lace pillowcases to lull the sleeper into dreams. Sleep was as much a social performance as a biological need. The Victorian fascination with proper rest involved strict bedtimes, avoidance of stimulating activities after dusk, and a complex etiquette around nighttime visits and even bedroom decor. You catch a glimpse of an old, worn book of poems resting on the nightstand, a companion for those midnight hours when sleep was elusive. It's easy to imagine Victorian minds wandering between science and superstition, weighing the benefits of fresh air against fears of night air diseases. A curious detail, some believed that talking about dreams could bring bad luck, so silence before sleep was golden. Others kept dream journals, hoping to capture insights from the subconscious. Scholars continue to debate whether these customs truly helped Victorian insomnia sufferers or simply masked deeper anxieties about health and morality. After all, the age was famous for its contradictions. You hear the soft rustle of silk, the faint hiss of steam from the tea, and feel yourself drifting along with the slow, measured heartbeat of a bygone bedtime. You walk through a cool, shadowy corridor lined with papyrus scrolls and painted hieroglyphs, the scent of lotus blossoms drifting softly on the desert breeze. Outside, the Nile glistens under a canopy of stars as ancient Egypt's great civilization settles into the quietude of night. You prepare to explore how the Egyptians approached sleep and dreams, a world where rest was sacred and dreams were messages from the gods. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Egyptians placed great importance on sleep and dreams, often visiting dream temples called sleeping sanctuaries or incubation temples to seek divine guidance through dreams. Quirky tidbit: they used special pillows made from wood or stone, sometimes carved with protective symbols, believing that these objects could influence the quality of sleep and dream visions. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread among common people or mostly reserved for priests and royalty. You imagine the soft flicker of oil lamps casting dancing shadows on alabaster walls, the rhythmic sound of the Nile's current soothing the mind. A priest prepares an incense offering of frankincense and myrrh, their fragrances curling upwards in fragrant spirals. The dreamer reclines on a wooden pillow, eyes closed, ready to receive the god's cryptic messages. Sleep was not mere rest but a sacred journey. Egyptians believed dreams connected the mortal and divine worlds. Dream interpretation was a respected art, with manuals guiding priests on how to decode visions of symbols like crocodiles or lotus flowers, each carrying specific meanings. A curious practice involved wearing amulets or leaving offerings beside the bed to attract good dreams and ward off nightmares. Some believed that the god Thoth, patron of wisdom and writing, visited in dreams to inspire new knowledge. Scholars debate how much of this elaborate dream culture influenced daily Egyptian life and how much was ceremonial theater performed by religious elites. Regardless, the reverence for sleep and dreams shines through countless artifacts and texts. You breathe in the cool desert night, the distant call of a night bird echoing softly, and feel the delicate balance of mystery and comfort that ancient Egypt wove into the fabric of its nightly rest. As the journey through these ancient and medieval nights draws to a close, you feel the gentle tide of history recede into calm silence. The rustling leaves, flickering flames, and whispered prayers all dissolve into a soft, soothing hum that lulls your mind and body. Imagine the cool touch of night air brushing your skin, the faint scent of lavender or pine settling softly in the room around you. The distant stars wink in slow rhythm, like old friends keeping silent watch. Each breath deepens, slows, as the rhythms of ancient worlds harmonize with your own. Your thoughts grow lighter, as if floating on a slow river beneath the moon's pale glow. There is comfort in knowing that across centuries and continents, people have found peace in sleep's embrace, weaving rituals, dreams, and gentle customs to cradle themselves through darkness. Now, let the steady beat of your heart sync with the quiet pulse of history's nights, soft and unwavering. Allow your mind to drift along with the whispered stories, the tender rituals, and the peaceful echoes of forgotten dreamers. Soon, the last tendrils of wakefulness will melt away and sleep will carry you beyond time's grasp, into a realm where stories blend with dreams and rest is both ancient and new. So, As you surrender to the calm, know that these nights have wrapped you in a warm, gentle blanket spun from the threads of countless quiet hours. Sleep well, dream sweetly, and wake refreshed, carrying the soft glow of history's night with you. End of script. Sweet dreams.